Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in today. I am Nicole Forbes with Dennis's 70s, and we are talking about air plants, also known as Tillandsia. Today's handout information is attached to the title on the video title, and again, I am doing my best to make sure that you can hear me through this mask with the PA system I'm using, but please do not comment about the masks. We are mandated to wear them in the state of Oregon, and there is another employee in the room. It's important that we all stay safe. So with that being said, it is really just a fun kind of light topic that we're talking about today. So air plants, light air, there's a kind of air plants themselves, they're an easy care plant. It is a fun category of plants to grow and display. And they literally, this morning I grabbed 3 of my air plants, threw them in a Tupperware, and brought them to work with me. So, how often can you just like take plants around with you, like show and tell, or, you could have an air plant that worked with you Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and came home with you on the weekends. Much easier than, of course, taking the whole potted plant to and fro. But so let's start with, what are air plants, and a little bit about air plants in general. The family that air plants belong to, as I mentioned, is a large indoor plant or tropical plant family that we have various other degrees of familiarity with, or have grown in or seen in our lifetime. Probably the most well-known and delicious member of the bromeliad family would be the pineapple. And so our little air plant friend here, or our slightly stranger maybe looking air plant here, both of these are distant cousins to the pineapple. And you may see a closer relationship if you've ever seen a pineapple plant growing. You may see a closer relationship to a pineapple in this bromeliad here, but they are all cousins to one another in the bigger plant family. Disregard the row of holiday cheer behind them. The poinsettias and the little Norfolk Island pines have nothing to do with anything other than it's a week before Christmas, and so I just wanted a pretty backdrop. And air plants are kind of tiny, so they needed something to show off against. So bromeliads are, again, that wide family, and we see on my table here I have a representation of some of those bromeliads that we grow as indoor plants or tropical plants. Some of them have really colorful foliage, like the center of this bromeliad here, or stripy leaves, such as this one here. And down in the center of this pink-centered one, there's actually a flower bud developing. So it's pretty far down in there, and I'm not even going to try to make the phone camera see it, but there is a little flower down there that's developing, and we'll talk about bromeliads and how they flower and when they flower and all of that shortly. But speaking of a bromeliad flower, you can see one of them with a more distinct flower bud forming right out of the center of this plant. You see the little stem comes up with this red and yellow, or kind of orangish and yellow cluster. Now these aren't even yet fully in bloom, so this flower bud is now going to produce either a pink or purple colorful blossom that's going to come out of the scales kind of in between on all of the little pokey parts of the plant. So not only, of course, have we had a neat green plant with a cool profile as it grew, then it's developed this flower stalk that has slowly become more and more colorful and tall over probably the course of a couple of months. Now, yet still, over another few months, we will see the flowers slowly develop on this plant before those flowers fade, and then the kind of entire show is over. And then we can go ahead and clip that flower stalk off back in the center again. But again, I'll revisit flowering shortly. Now, one of the characteristics that our air plants, or Tillandsias, have is that they are a group of plants known as epiphytes as well. So they're in the family Bromeliad. They are in the genus Tillandsia, which again is just their fancy scientific formal name. And the genus Tillandsia tends to be epiphytes, which are plants that grow on other structures or even on other plants. So here in the Pacific Northwest, I think we are pretty used to seeing a couple of different epiphytes, and that include the long stringy moss that grows, sometimes we know it as old man's beard. There are ferns that grow up in the open branches of a lot of our deciduous trees, such as the big leaf maples or silver maples, or even some of our oaks grow those lovely licorice ferns, or some of the more epiphytic ferns on the branches. But Tillandsia epiphytes come from typically more tropical environments, and they are, in most cases, growing attached to the branches, the bark, or the trunk of a taller and larger tree. So, and where they're attached, they're not growing usually straight up and down like so. They're usually growing outward facing from the tree. And what we see on the end where we might expect to see roots on a plant, we do see what appears to be a brown, scraggly, root-like structure. But these roots are simply an adhesion technique, or a way for the plant to anchor itself onto another plant. It only holds them tight. It does not, the root is not responsible for gaining any nutrients or moisture or anything like that for the plant. They get that from the air, which is how they get their name. Now, in their natural environment, and again, I have to refer to my cheat sheet here for all of the different places that air plants can grow. So I have familiarity with them growing in Florida. I have seen them growing in Hawaii, Costa Rica, and those areas. But they can be found in forests, mountains, and deserts of northern Mexico, southeastern United States, and then through Mesoamerica, the Caribbean, and central Argentina. So quite a range of habitats that we can find these plants in, including, moist, humid forests to more arid, drier desert conditions. So we're going to talk about how to kind of look at your different types of Tillandsia and make a best guess as to which environment it comes from, whether it's that more arid desert environment or whether it's the more humid tropical forest environment, because that's going to have a lot to do with how you care for them and how much water they need. So again, we're going to cover that. They can, from that range of plants, they can also represent a pretty big range in size. Now this is one of the larger of the air plants. This is Tillandsia xerographica. This still can become a larger plant than it is now, but not much larger. Maybe a little more like a 2 handful, whereas right now it's a decent 1 handful. The mature air plant will reach its kind of ultimate size, and then what it will do is start creating smaller plants that are like pups or offshoots from around the base of the plant itself. So often they are not growing on and on and on to a single plant becoming larger and larger over time. But once they have those little babies, they become a wider or a rounder plant with more plantlets kind of attached around the base. So almost like a round ball of air plants rather than an individual. And those babies can be separated off and then grown independently, which case they'll be able to kind of achieve a bigger size because they'll be on their own and maybe even again, start to reproduce and make babies of their own. So because most of these plants are naturally occurring environments in filtered light, trees, tree canopy, maybe near a waterfall, getting splash from, the waterfall. They're in areas where they don't necessarily receive direct sunlight. And that is one of probably the most important things about the light for an air plant. So although, honestly, I've kind of tried to put these plants everywhere. Although they can go down to temperatures as low as like 50 degrees, they can't be left out in direct bright light for any duration of time. So there was a while where I thought that this might be the perfect plant to have it as a plant in my car. I mean, maybe I'm the only person in the world that wants to have a plant in their car, but it seemed great. Cactus are an obvious accident waiting to happen. I've accidentally had some succulents live in my car, but they rolled under the seat and I kind of forgot about them. They survived, but I didn't enjoy them very much. I thought, this is great, kind of in my cup holder or, where I have my little navigation area. Turns out I sunburned the poor little thing just one day in spring in my car with the windshield, just probably magnifying it, and it just burnt to a crisp. So nice and humid in my car, not necessarily the filtered light that the plant required. So lesson learned, the best place at home that my Tillandsia and air plants all live is in a north-facing window. So many of us find that north-facing window to be maybe a challenging place to grow plants. That's a pretty low light or at best medium bright light. And so it's just perfect for, again, that space. Also happens to be right above my sink area and kitchen counter where I don't necessarily want dirt and just the things that come along with plants that have that are growing in dirt. So they're a little bit cleaner to display in my kitchen, which tends to again just work out perfectly for me and the air plants. It's okay to offer them fluorescent light as well. So they also, like I mentioned, make the perfect 9 to 5 Monday through Friday office buddy. They keep the trap shut. They don't eat your snacks. And they'll take just the fluorescent light that comes from, you and your cubicle and whatever you've got there, or nice, ambient light from the windows nearby or whatever. So whether you're working in your home office or you do go to a place of work, this could be a great plant for you. You don't have to worry about weekend cleaning staff doing something weird to it. You can take it home on the weekends. Easy peasy. Throw it in your briefcase, right? So the most regular attention that we give our air plants is a weekly check-in or watering. So honestly, I like to think that I water my air plants weekly. I mean to water my air plants weekly. It's on my list of chores on Monday, when I do my laundry, I kind of think, there we go, as we're doing all of this, I should be soaking the air plants. But I definitely have skipped a week here and there through the years, and as I admitted in our blog, I have also accidentally left my air plants soaking in water for an entire work day, putting them in the morning and then, jumping in the shower and coming out and they're rushing out through the door and forgetting completely that they were soaking in water. Don't make that a practice. They do not want to soak for, a total entire 8-10 hour work day, but if it's done very rarely and accidentally. In most cases, again, you can get those plants to recover or recuperate. It's the draining after the watering that is extremely critical. So let's back up for a minute and look at a couple of different textures and types of air plants. So I'm going to put xerographica down, and we'll look at a couple that are a little bit more, the kind that you might see more regularly at a garden center or a place of purchase. So here we have Ionantha, Junica. I mean, they all have names. But look at the three different styles of plants. So we have here a real fat bulbous base and then rounded, fairly stiff leaves that they're silver green, but they're nowhere near as hairy or fuzzy as some of the other varieties of air plants. Now, this variety comes from a more tropical environment and doesn't need to have all of the fuzzy silver hairs that help trap and gather moisture out of the air because it has more ample air in the first place. So this plant needs a little bit more regular watering or more frequent watering than ones that are more silver and fuzzy. A really silver and fuzzy variety you can see here especially down towards the base of the plant. It's almost white, almost chalky looking, and that chalky appearance can actually be kind of wiped off or rubbed off with your hands or with your fingers. Now, if we took one of these little leaves with all of that chalky look and put them under either a really powerful magnifying lens or a microscope, you would actually see that each of those little hairs is a special structure on the plant called a trichome. And the trichome is sort of like a little miniature water tower. So it is microscopically stands up above the leaf and has a little drop of moisture at the top of the trichome. So that's how trichomes help absorb water when we soak them or pull water out of a moist atmosphere and then provide that to the plant as needed. Rarely in their natural environment they never go swimming. They don't ever get completely submerged in water or dumped like we say to water them. And in tropical climates, often there is, a deluge or a downpour, not monsoon, but just like a hard and heavy rain that comes all at once, but then it's over. Very different from our Oregon rains, where it's sort of just water is in the sky and you just walk around getting wet even though it doesn't look like it's raining, and that lasts all day long. Tropical rains are just intense and short. That gives the plant a dousing of rain. Then usually not only does it stop raining, but it's warm and humid and the moisture is allowed to somewhat, evaporate from the plant right after that watering. In our home environments, not only do we have much different air, and especially in Oregon we have pretty humid just climate in general, so we have a nice cool but humid temperate environment here. If you were in Montana, for example, or high up in the elevations in the Rockies, your air is thinner and drier for sure. And when we run heaters, fireplaces, wood stoves during the winter, also those types of heating styles do also dry out our indoor air. So we have to think about the changes in humidity in our homes, but in most cases we have nothing near the ideal air, humidity, and environment indoors for our plants. We can replicate for air plants that filtered light, but we need to kind of make up for the fact that they're not living in Florida You know, I mean, we all have to make up for the fact that we're not living in tropical jungle climates, and we deal with that in our very different ways. Now, based off of, oh, I didn't show our little Junica here. So we see thick, stiff, smooth green, example here from more tropical environments versus a really chalky, fuzzy, silver covered example here from a more arid or desert environment. Has to make the most of the environment, you know, the moisture in the air by collecting it with these little trichomes. And then we have a plant here that is somewhere in between. So we do see that it has those nice little fuzzy silver edges down towards the base of the plant. But as these leaves grow taller and thinner, they get greener, and then of course up at the top here, because this one has been dipped in a dye, we see that it's been color enhanced. You can see that against my shirt, right? The green and the red. So, but even if it hadn't been color enhanced, the silver kind of goes away towards the top of the plant. And yeah, there's a little dust there. Dust is actually like a fertilizer for air plants. So again, I'm telling you, the perfect plant, they even eat dust as just something that they think is good for them. So I just love that about you. But now the thin leaves on this guy, and again, the lack of trichomes makes it a little bit harder to keep watered on a regular basis. So both of these examples are a little bit more of, I'm going to say, intermediate style air plant, because they can be slightly more challenging to get the watering right. Whereas the silver fuzzy varieties that have more of the trichomes, a lot easier to get a handle on how to water them. And I find, as long as you are drying them well, they're quite forgiving about some like accidental mishaps, you know, skipped waterings or way too long of waterings, as long as, again, that's not something that you do as a habit. So when we water, we want to try to use room temperature water. And now if, like me, you know, you don't plan hours or a day ahead that you're going to water and, you know, pull out lovely tap water for your air plants, then I'm just going to make a mix that comes out of the tap that feels good to my fingers. So, you know, neither hot nor cold, just room temperature water. And I'm just pulling that out of the tap and kind of adjusting it as I go. And here is an example of just a container of water, and I've filled this up so that, again, it feels pretty close to my body temperature. It's probably closer to room temperature at this point, but this is the type of container that you could use to soak your air plants. And now I have an example of an air plant that I brought from home. So this little lucky lady, I really am giving her a moment to shine, because she fell behind the refrigerator on Monday, and I didn't really think I was going to fish her out until I decided overnight that I couldn't live without her. And so I had to make up a little kind of wire fishing rod and pull her out from behind the fridge. And boy, did she have a nice little layer of dust on her then. But this plant I have had for many years. She has many babies that have been reluctant to leave home, so to speak. So she's got, I say this is like her firstborn here. And you can see that it wiggles like a loose tooth. So it could be detached, but it's not ready. And so I'm letting it live at home for a little while longer. Then, of course, you can see another baby here, also a little bit on the loose side. These two are of a similar generation. Then tucked up closer to the base of the plant, you also see several smaller babies that are developing that over time will kind of loosen like these, wiggle around and be able to be removed at some point. often when I'm watering this plant, I figure one of the babies is going to come off at some point, but so far they haven't. So watering on this example, and we see she's nice and fuzzy. She's got a lot of those silver trichomes. I do call her a girl, but you know. So lots of silver trichomes. This enables the plant again to be somewhat more forgiving. So watering, when I water my air plants, I water sometimes 10 or 12 at a time. So naturally I have a slightly larger container. I just put them all in one after another. Sometimes I push them down below water to make sure that they are getting fully saturated, and that silver gray color of the leaves, once it's been watered and fully kind of absorbed the water, changes to more of a sage green. So again, she could soak just a little bit longer, but we're starting to see less silver overall as those trichomes that were the silver are absorbing the water and turning green. So that's a good indication that the plant has gotten well hydrated. But we can leave it soaking for 10, 15, even 20 minutes. Usually I set a timer. I throw a dozen in at a time. I set a timer for about 20 minutes, and then I, pull them out. Now taking them out of the water is just as critical. So once you take it out of the water, and I'm always super careful with her because she's got all these babies, but you want to hold it firmly, and I do 3 shakes usually. So might even get, you're in the splash zone, but 1, 2, 3. Now I've really, pretty seriously shook the water off of this as much as I can. Now this plant has a soft top, so the foliage on it is relatively soft, and it's even somewhat recurved. So I can usually make her do a headstand. So I can stand her upside down, and now the babies are at least kind of facing outward or to the side, which means that hopefully water is coming out of those, or it's dripping dry. But it's more important that that big plant now can drip dry away from the base of the plant. So, and what I mean by that, the base, we want this plant, once we finish watering it, we want to drip it dry upside down. So this one's much more difficult to make stand on its head. So I use like a juice glass is a perfect example. Oh, still not going to stay in this juice glass. This might need a pint glass, where you can just use an empty glass, stick your air plant in it, and let it sit kind of over the rim. It may be an hour or so before it's fully dry, and then you can put it back in its display for another, week or so before you water it again. No, it's not, like I said, I grab a dozen, I throw them in a container, I set the timer, I'm doing laundry, I take them out, flick, 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 upside down, and sometimes I'll leave them for the rest of the afternoon. My house partners don't always appreciate that there are air plants all over the kitchen counter on air plant watering day, so I do try to, get them placed back in their locations before too long has gone, but they're pet safe. They're, not a mess. They're not dirty. There's not a lot of dirt to them. So again, as they sit on the counter stripping dry or whatever, it's not like they've become a health hazard or a real obstacle in the kitchen.
Is it okay to use rainwater, or is distilled water better?
Distilled water often doesn't have enough minerals. So, they do actually benefit from some minerals. Chlorine, if you have really hard water and you use softeners or chlorine that you can smell, I would let that absorb, or not absorb, but, evaporate. The distilled water often doesn't give the plants what they really need, but tap water does. Rainwater is excellent. And then, believe it or not, pond water, aquarium water is awesome for these guys. So you're changing your fish tank, aquarium water is like magical for pretty much all indoor plants. And even, again, your air plants are going to love that. They get that, nutrient that has been kind of the cause of either algae or things, that you need to switch out the water in that tank anyway. So water from a puddle, water from the pond, and aquariums, and of course rainwater. All of those are great, and air plants won't disagree. But really, the one thing that harms air plants is copper. So as long as you don't use copper wire to wrap them onto a project or display them in, your Moscow Mule mug that you're not using anymore, or put them on a copper surface of any kind, copper is toxic to the plants and will create almost like a burn and start to kill them. So other than that, the type of water is pretty easy. I have watered them with cold water out of the tap, as well as, drawing out that perfect bath temperature, and they're pretty easy going on that as well. Misting on the fuzzier, more silver type plants, misting might be, if you're a regular and committed mister, that might be enough to keep them happy. However, something without as many of the trichomes just don't have the botanical apparatus to hold the mist that you give them. So misting this type of Tillandsia probably would not be adequate enough to keep it watered. Again, that's why I mean that this is a little bit more of an intermediate style Tillandsia, whereas the more silvery they are, the more forgiving. Better for beginners, and then you kind of figure things out. The different ways that we display them as well can also affect their health. So often we want to put them in closed glass vessels. So there's a lot of, ariums and terrariums and things that, cool glass that's out there that are cool to display your air plants with, a pretty gemstone or a neat piece of driftwood or that kind of thing. But we want to make sure, excuse me, we want to make sure that your container that you're displaying them in has an open air component or open air element, meaning it is not a corked, closed terrarium vessel, and if that is the style, that you leave the cork top off so that the terrarium is open enough for better air circulation. One thing that would be harmful in a terrarium that was closed is a lot of condensation that forms on the inside of the glass on those closed terrariums. That's likely to keep the air plant just too wet without probably having enough light to, dry it up in between. So then we end up with it just staying too waterlogged and soggy. What do we got here? I was going to show the difference between here again, quite a variety in leaf thicknesses. We have a very, very silver, fuzzy, you can feel that it's furry and fuzzy on this plant, so lots and lots of trichomes. This is also very silvery, very fuzzy, but much, much, much thinner leaves. And the foliage on this is just that much more likely to dry out. And we see even on this some kind of dry tips, possibly not being watered as regularly as it needs. So we see a little bit of those dry tips. Now, another on a larger leafed plant, its sign of not being watered enough is that the leaves themselves, rather than being flat and open, will actually begin to curl, to roll inward, like so. So they'll roll up almost like a straw or a tube. And as you see those leaves rolling up, that's an indication that they're being underwatered or not being watered regularly enough. So dry tips or that slightly curling in of the leaf is a really good indication that it's not been dried or not been watered frequently enough. I brought some examples. I mean, perhaps if you're watching this class, you may have already killed a couple of Tillandsia, in which case, like, you don't need to see what the dead ones look like. But it's always a good example, and every gardener and all of us in life, you know, should try our hardest to learn from our mistakes, right? So we're going to take a look at some of the plants that I brought together here that are no longer really with us or are on their way to the big compost pile in the sky. Here we have that same Ionantha. So this is hard to recognize as the same plant here, but this is what it looks like healthy, and this is what it looks like when it's really passed away. Now, the center of this dead one, we actually see a little kind of purplish pink color. Can you see it? And that was the beginning of a flower. So this plant actually started to flower. Maybe it did completely flower. That's a stressful time. So that may have been when things went sideways for it. And then again, you know, at that point, it has become no longer. I believe this plant dried out. Not that it got overwatered. Because, actually, probably overwatering. So as I pull on the top of this one, it's detaching from the base. So it really shows us a darkening, rotting kind of look at the base where this plant most likely wasn't shaken and dried well enough upside down or on its side, so it was allowed to be put back up, right side up, while still holding a lot of moisture in its base. That over time, or even once or twice, has caused the plant to rot, and now it's just coming apart in our fingers. Before that happens, before that stage, you may be able to catch it. Now, this example is still green at the top, so we still have that healthy looking silver gray foliage on the top, but at the bottom, clearly it is rotting to the point where we can remove leaves at the base. Now I even see there's mildew, unfortunately. So we see this white here is mold or mildew that's forming. So anytime you do see like one little petal or leaf start to rot, you want to try to get it away as quickly as you can, because just like bread, you know, rot spreads, mold spreads, mildew will just continue to kind of grow and try to consume. So this plant may be beyond saving. We see that it's still it's mushy, so you shouldn't be able to get it so squeezable at the bottom. It's this leaf that is kind of the closest now to the base has really started to curl and damage at the tip, which shows that it's likely already dead. And it's still easily removed from the plant. How's that? It's still mushy. I mean, that's the factor right here. The top looks fine. The top looks good, but it is wet, soft, and even, well, I'm gonna just we shouldn't be able to do any of that. So, unfortunately, root rot, that crown rot or root rot, is almost impossible to recover from. So it is better to, I mean, you don't want to let your plants dry out all the time either, but it does less permanent damage to let those air plants go dry every so often than to keep them too wet or to like dump them in a hurry and then leave them, too wet for too long. Always just a bad idea. Now,
We have some questions about fertilizing.
okay.
Figured you might get to that.
Yeah. So there are special air plant fertilizers that can be purchased and used. Like there's a spritzer style, which is probably one of the easiest, that when you just kind of feel like giving your plant a little extra, or in the spring and summer months giving it a little spritz in between waterings with a bromeliad or low numbered air plant fertilizer. But you can also give them like half to quarter diluted, like regular organic indoor houseplant fertilizer. The fact is that I have never fertilized mine other than pond water or aquarium water, or rainwater. They really don't. Again, they don't need much. Now, possibly I have a very dusty house and they're getting all the fertilizer they need straight from the dust in the air. That's probably the case. So let's say I'm less clean than you, but there you go. If you want your plants to do better and you don't want to fertilize, just stop dusting, and the air plants will thrive. Hopefully that's the case. I wanted to show this same plant that was just so silvery and sage green just a few minutes ago. So I have put it in water. I'm going to give it its good, be careful you don't overshake it. So I gave it a shake and I took the top off. That's a nice blooper there. But after soaking it, it's gotten very, very green. So we can really see that it has absorbed the water that it needs to then take it through the next week. Sometimes you'll even see patches of silver, like on the back of this leaf, that haven't fully gotten wet enough yet. So even just swishing it around in the water a little bit more to get all of those silvery surfaces to absorb water and turn totally green, that's going to give it that watering that we need so that then it can drip dry and then wait another week or even 10 days or longer this time of year before getting watered.
And you dunked the base as well?
What's that?
Did you dunk the base as well?
I dumped the entire plant. So I actually just, same as I had shown a minute ago, bucket of water. Here's another, just a tiny little baby in the water. Hold it down even sometimes. This one doesn't need as much. It's just a youngster. You kind of squish it around. But I still see silver, so I'm going to leave it in there until that silver really absorbs the water and turns green. Sometimes you'll even see air bubbles, like clinging to the leaves on the plant underwater. And over time, just like any air bubbles, they're going to come to the surface and then your plant can get a nice green look. That means it's absorbed the water. So we'll leave that one in for just a little bit longer, just totally submerged, piled in there even sometimes. Now, we saw, color enhancement. I mean, they're beautiful enough as they are. They're silver, they're gray, they're green. This kind of gorgeous sage green of the larger ones, that's often kind of the most common color that you see on the air plants. But occasionally we see that they are color enhanced. And color enhanced includes plants that have been dipped in like a natural plant dye. So the red edges of the leaves here are not naturally red. So they have been dipped in that dye and they are color enhanced. And this red color, as the plant, let's say you have the plant for years, that's going to fade over time. The new growth coming out of the center doesn't have that red. So as the new growth comes out, that'll be undipped or uncolored. So eventually these enhanced varieties do fade in their colors. This is another style of color enhancement where you see kind of purple banding basically on this plant. So this one's been dyed in almost like a zebra stripe pattern or a striped pattern. And it is also already faded a little bit from what it originally looked like. These tags will tell you usually enhanced on the tag. So if you think that that's a trick, it's not meant to be a trick, you're usually informed, if that color is natural or not. And as we saw, one of our poor, sad examples that we're all learning from, basically all air plants at some point in their lives will make a flower. So here we have that little dried up bit of sort of a violet pink flower that we don't have a full one to look at, but the flower comes out of the center usually of the plant, and as they begin to flower, I don't know if this is going to flower or not, but as they begin to flower, they seem to get a little bit more like high centered. So they kind of elongate and come up towards the top with a little bit of a high center. Often that's an indication that they are getting ready to flower. Now, flowering in the bromeliad family, flowering is the grand finale for the plant as it comes to or towards the end of its life. So I say this because, of course, it's very common and understandable that as plant shoppers, we may look for flowers, and we may buy an air plant specifically, or buy a bromeliad in bloom, thinking, well, that's going to give me the most enjoyment or the longest enjoyment, not understanding, although these flowers last a very long time, much longer than your average, outdoor flower or rose or whatever, so 6-8 weeks or even longer, although the flowers last a long time, as the flowers fade, the main plant, the parent plant that flower belongs to, will also slowly begin to die. So now this goes also for our air plants, only depending on the species, they may flower kind of like slightly before, or before they kind of wind up their lives, or they flower kind of right at the ends of their lives. Now these plants are replacing themselves usually at the same time as they're making a flower. So what I mean by that is they've made an offset, or what's usually just referred to as a pup, like a puppy, but a pup. So here, our bromeliad flowering belongs to the largest plant here in the pot. So this big plant that you see. But off the side of this big plant, if I pull up a couple of leaves, here is pup number 1. And then if I turn it and we move pup number 1 a little bit.
Hold it down a little bit. Thank you.
Here is pup number 2. So now these are brand new, younger versions of this plant itself. And as the top plant completely dies back, we can just cut it at the base and allow these 2 other younger pups to grow up in its place. And then slowly over time, they will repeat the process, making a flower and then eventually dying out, but replacing themselves with the pup as well. So this one is showing us a great example of that, as is this one here. So this is, like I showed you, that more gorgeous purple, pinkish purple center of this bromeliad does have a little flower bud deep down in the center that you probably can't quite see. But here on the side, here we have the pup that will be replacing this plant as it slowly ages and dies at the end, and here it is towards the end of its life. So it may make more than one pup. They're usually here around the outside or the base, or maybe coming from right inside one leaf of the plant. But that is how that's what's happening when they flower, is usually flowering is, magical and beautiful and lasts a long time, but then that plant that the flower belongs to will most likely die. Here is a fun example of what things this time of year you can do with an air plant. A fun little twiggy wreath or, holiday wreath. A couple weeks ago when we did our wreath workshop, I suggested and showed adding some air plants into the wreath. But here is another of the examples of air plants that are making babies but not yet making flowers. So we don't have a bloom on this older plant, but it's probably at about mature height and size for this type of Tillandsia. So now it is making babies on the side. So it's got such curly, it's so curly it kind of hides its little babies protecting on my bed. But here, if I hold back the curly front, you can see again, here's one baby and it's a little bit loose, but it's still firmly attached all together at the base with this little hold fast root system that it has. And then tucked closer in towards the plant behind even like one leaf here is another baby. So if I wanted, I can take that off and have a smaller plant that just grew, by itself. And eventually this little start should grow up to be like the parent that it comes from. So should end up with all those curly leaves and about this size. But this is again the process. Now, when one day this plant starts to show a flower bud in the center, I will know that that's towards the end of its life. As you water a flowering bromeliad or air plant, you actually want to try not to put the flower underwater. So if it were flowering at that point, you would, soak it underwater, but be a little bit more careful about where you place the plant so that the actual bloom portion doesn't go underwater. It doesn't do as well underwater. Now, we've talked about troubleshooting, now this guy that's been soaking in the water, it's pretty much got all of the gray, silvery parts are gone, and now we really see it as more of just a green plant. You can still see a bit of that frosty fuzziness, but if, if you're near a computer, what am I kidding, you're on a computer, right? When you hang up, Google homework, do a search for trichome and hit images and see what a trichome looks like. Trichome. I'm pretty sure that's how you spell trichome. Google will know, right? So trichome, and just look and see what they are. They're really fascinating, and a lot of different plants have trichomes. Even tomatoes, that silver fuzzy kind of look that a tomato leaf has, also has trichomes on it. So you're welcome if that takes you down a Thursday rabbit hole of horticultural wonders, but that's what I'm here for. So there's that. Now, there's so many display ideas. You can put these things in pretty much anything. We have some really fun local artists here that Stena 7Ds carries that have created fantastic wall art displays. So these really cool ceramic wall hangers come from Carter and Rose here in Southeast Portland. And you can kind of choose your air plant. They just sit in here on their own. And of course that makes them easy to remove, easy to water and maintain, and then easy to put back in. Take the tag off and then they're much easier to put back in, but easy to replace and hang on your wall. They also come a little bit larger here, so again, maybe a better size for my larger curly here, or hanging, kind of fun hanging options. So I have mine often hanging in like my kitchen window. I have a weird, I don't know, they're like a tropical seed pod or something. I don't know where I picked them up, but that's where a lot of mine sit in. But this very same idea allows us to hang and just to have a cool air plant sitting in the container. Sometimes you have to finesse them a little bit so they sit just right. But that would be a really fun, kind of clean, nice look in your kitchen. And these could be hanging right in the windowsill or somewhere where they're getting that indirect medium light or filtered light that they love. Seashells, abalone shells, where you actually even have them growing. They don't care if they grow upside down. They don't really know that they're upside down. In fact, they might even grow upside down in nature. So you could mount them somehow upside down. Temporary type displays like holiday centerpieces, holiday wreaths. Now remember that these are in most cases tropical plants. So they really don't want to go down below 50 degrees as far as temperatures go. So they're not likely to be on your outdoor holiday wreath. They're still traditionally indoor decor. And even in the summertime when it's warm as Florida is, just remember that I already killed one in my car. So they aren't necessarily the kind of plant that can just go with you everywhere all the time. But I have seen these used in, so this with maybe a couple of palm fronds, maybe a little long stringy gray old man's beard or long moss along with it, as these have been used as bridal bouquets, as table centerpieces with some candles around them. Again, beautiful in like an abalone shell, a wooden bowl, on driftwood, on your Christmas tree, tie them on gifts. Really, sky's the limit as far as how to display them, how to gift them, and how to enjoy them. So again, if there are questions I haven't answered, I will follow up with this video by answering the rest of the questions on the video. And otherwise, thanks so much for watching. Happy gardening.